Hello everyone. In this video, I'm going to be showing an example of using a loop with an array. Now, loops are really powerful when using arrays. Loops have other applications like we saw in Chapter 5, but loops are very useful. One of their most common uses is with arrays because you can use a loop to perform some function. This slide shows arithmetic, but to show any function or on every single element of an array. So if you have an array of 20 elements, doesn't matter whether it's strings, integers, doubles, whatever, if you want to do something to every single element of that array, then using a loop is a great way to do that. So in this example, there's two equivalent pieces of code. The one on the left shows a while loop. The one on the left shows a for loop that do the exact same thing. But this example shows using the control variable of your loop as the subscript in your array will allow you to do the same thing on every element. So in this example, there is an array called MyScores. It's an array of integers. And what these loops are doing is adding 3 to every single element of the array. So the first time through the loop, sub equals 0. So MyScores subscript 0 gets 3 added to it. Okay. The second time through the loop, sub is 1. So MyScores element number 1 has 3 added to it. So it goes through the entire array and does the same function or same arithmetic in this case on every single element of that array. The length property is very useful when you're referring to arrays. We saw the length property with strings, and the length property for arrays works the same way. It's an integer that tells you how many elements are in an array. The length is always 1 higher than the highest subscript of an array. So if you have an array of size 20, the length property will give you 20. The highest subscript is 19 because you start from 0. The for each statement is nice. It's used particularly with arrays. It's like a for statement, but it's kind of like shorthand. So in this example, you can say for each, and then you have to state the data type, and then you just make up a name for it, and then you say the keyword in, and then the name of the array. So data type, a new made-up variable name for that data type, the keyword in, and then the array name. It does the same thing as some of those examples we saw on the 2 slides ago with the for and the while loops. And then last thing I wanted to point out on the slides before I jump into the example is that a string is not an array of characters, strictly speaking, but it can act like one sometimes. So you can use subscripts with strings the same way that you use subscripts with arrays. So if you have a string variable called str1, then str1 with a 0 in brackets is telling C# that you want element number 0 or character number 0 of that string. So char var1 in this case would hold the value of the character h. Here where I'm showing an example of this length property. So this, like I just said a minute ago, the string, every string has a length property just like an array has a length property. So there are a lot of similarities between strings and arrays. You can in some cases think of a string as an array of characters, but strictly speaking it isn't an array of characters. So for example, you can't like assign a chain, you can't change a character in a string by saying that you want the element number 0 in this string to be equal to something. Okay, now let's jump over to Visual Studio, and we will do an example of using a loop with an array. So I'm actually going to build on the example from the previous video, where there was an array of quiz scores, and the user could access or find the value of a quiz score by inputting which quiz number they wanted. Here on this form, I'm going to switch to design view, and I'm going to add another button to my form. I'm going to put it kind of over here to the right, and I'm going to call this button the add button, and the text is going to be add 1 point to every quiz score. So when the user clicks on this button, what we want to happen is not to just add a point to one individual score, but to add 1 point to every quiz score in that array. Well, I guess this might not be the most real world example, because I don't know why you would ever add 1 point to every single quiz. But we'll go with it just for the sake of showing you how the code would work and how you would use a loop with an array. So now we have two buttons. So I'm going to double click on this button I just created. So I'm going to have a second click event method. So I've got my OK button click method, and we programmed that in the previous video. And now we've got an add button click method. So here it's good that we created this array outside of the click method, because now we also want to use that array in our other button method. So if we had created the array in our click button method, then we wouldn't be able to use it in our add button click method. Okay, so what we're going to do here is use a loop to add 1 to every quiz score in the array. So what we can do is I'll use a for loop, and we can say for int x equals 0 while x is less than 11 x plus plus. So what this is doing is creating a loop that will iterate 11 times, once for each element of the array, and then our loop control variable will be incremented by 1 each time. We can say quiz scores array, and then here, instead of putting like a specific number like quiz number 1 or quiz number 11, we're going to say we're going to use x as our subscript. So what that means is the first time we go through this the first time we go through this loop, we're going to do something to element number 0 of the quiz scores array. And the second time we go through, we're going to do something to element number 1 of the quiz scores array. And by the time we're done, we will have done something to every single quiz score in the array. Well, all we're doing is adding 1 to that element. So we're accessing that element, we're figuring out what's currently held in that element, we're adding 1 to it, and then we're assigning that value back to that element of the array. We could also have just written quiz scores x plus equals 1. That does the same thing. Okay, now because it's best practice to avoid hard coding any numbers, what would be good is, instead of just typing 11 here, is we could use quiz scores dot length. We can use the length property So even if we had created a quiz scores array that had 12 or that had 6 or that had any number in it, this allows us to go through our loop the exact number of times as there are elements in that array. So this is, you'll see this over and over again, kind of this syntax of, if you use a loop, have your control variable start at 0 and go until while x is still less than the length of that array. Now, if we go and test this, if we want to see the score for quiz 5, our score on that quiz was 7. Now, if we click this button, you won't see anything happen, but it should have added a point to every quiz score. So now, again, if we want to see the score for quiz 5, now the score was 8. And if we do it again, now the score was 9. And if we go back to quiz 1, where our original score was 9, now it should be 11 because we've pushed this button twice and added 1 point to every single score.